after many, many years of lies being told about me and my family, there comes a point where, again, going back to the relationship between certain members of the family and the tabloid press.
Breaking news from London has just shattered the careful facade Prince Harry has been maintaining for years. A sealed financial dossier, reportedly leaked from the heavily guarded archives of St. James's Palace, confirms the catastrophic number the Duke of Sussex has desperately tried to hide. A verified £150 million, $100 million debt crisis that threatens to destroy everything he's built in California. This isn't tabloid speculation anymore. This isn't anonymous sources whispering in the shadows.
There's a lot that I can forgive, but there needs to be conversations and then in order for reconciliation, and part of that has to be accountability.
According to Palace insiders, we're looking at documented evidence of financial collapse on a scale that would devastate even the wealthiest celebrities. And while the world assumed King Charles was preparing for a holiday reconciliation with his estranged son,
there's a lot that I can forgive, but there needs to be conversations and then in order for reconciliation, and part of that has to be accountability.
Something far more serious was unfolding behind closed doors. A ghost summit took place late last night in London. Unmarked Range Rovers carried senior royals through the rain-soaked streets, not to a family dinner at Clarence House, but to an emergency financial audit at St. James's Palace. The topic on the mahogany table wasn't forgiveness or healing fractured relationships. It was solvency. It was survival. It was whether the monarchy itself could afford to be associated with Prince Harry any longer. For years, the palace played defense against Harry's explosive interviews and tell-all projects. But tonight, the strategy shifted dramatically. Confronted with a desperate request for a massive bailout to save the Montecito mansion and cover mounting debts, Prince William and the King's financial enforcers made a historic decision that will echo through the Windsor family for generations. They aren't just cutting Harry off from royal funds, they're letting the creditors move in. They're watching as the California dream crumbles in real time, and they're doing it with cold, calculated precision. The question haunting Buckingham Palace tonight is simple but devastating. How did a prince raised in unimaginable wealth accumulate $100 million in debt, and why won't his family save him? The man with the ledger. To understand why panic is setting in across the Atlantic, we must first understand the man who stood at the head of the table at St. James's Palace during last night's emergency summit. It wasn't a diplomat skilled in family mediation. It wasn't a sympathetic royal aide trying to find middle ground. It was Sir Michael Stevens, the keeper of the Privy Purse, known in royal circles as the Living Ledger. Stevens is a man who views the monarchy not as a family soap opera or a centuries-old tradition, but as a corporation that must survive regardless of personal feelings or blood ties. The financial health of the institution always takes precedence over individual members, even princes. The report Sir Michael presented to King Charles and Prince William was nothing short of a forensic dissection of financial disaster. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't sympathetic. It was pure mathematics, laid bare, in columns and spreadsheets that told a story of catastrophic mismanagement. "The subject, Your Majesty," Stevens reportedly began, his voice measured and clinical, "is not scandal. It is mathematics, and the numbers are unforgiving." He opened the dossier to reveal what he called the anatomy of debt, a terrifying breakdown of exactly how $100 million evaporates when you attempt to live like royalty without the institutional support that makes such a lifestyle sustainable. The room fell silent as Stevens walked through each category of expenditure, each failed business venture, each legal battle that consumed millions without delivering results. King Charles looked increasingly pained. Prince William's jaw tightened. Princess Anne, who had insisted on attending despite the late hour, sat stone-faced, absorbing every detail. What they were witnessing wasn't just the failure of one man's financial planning. They were seeing the consequences of burning bridges to an institution that had always served as an invisible safety net, even for its most wayward members. The Montecito anchor, $14.65 million. The first cut was the deepest, the real estate anchor that's slowly drowning the Sussexes. Stevens pointed to the outstanding mortgage on the Montecito estate, $14.65 million still owed on the property they purchased for over $14 million in 2020. But it wasn't just the principal amount that silenced the room. It was the terms hidden in the fine print that Palace financial analysts had uncovered. The loan was likely subject to variable interest rates, rates that have skyrocketed in the post-pandemic American economy as the Federal Reserve fought inflation. The property isn't just sitting there as an asset, one Palace source explained. It's actively eating cash every single month. The burn rate is astronomical. Property taxes in Montecito alone exceed $200,000 annually. The mansion requires a full-time staff, housekeepers, groundskeepers, security coordinators, private chefs, costing millions per year. The maintenance of those famous gardens that provide privacy from paparazzi drones? Another six-figure annual expense. It requires Hollywood blockbuster income every single year just to break even, Stevens told the room. And Prince Harry hasn't had a blockbuster in a very long time. The streaming deals that were supposed to fund this lifestyle have collapsed. Netflix effectively terminated their relationship after the documentary series failed to meet viewership expectations. Spotify ended their partnership early, with one executive publicly calling them grifters on the way out. Book deals have been completed and the advances spent. Speaking engagements have dried up as public interest wanes and backlash intensifies. The Montecito mansion has transformed from a symbol of freedom and success into a concrete albatross, pulling them underwater financially. The vanity tax, $28 million in legal fees. Then came what Sir Michael Stevens described as the vanity tax. The staggering legal fees accumulated through Prince Harry's obsession with litigation and his compulsive need to fight every perceived slight in court. The audit attributed an estimated $28 million to legal battles across multiple jurisdictions. $28 million spent not on building assets or generating income, but on lawyers who frequently failed to deliver the victories Harry demanded. Stevens detailed the catastrophic losses in the High Court, specifically highlighting the failed Ravek case where Harry sued to maintain his taxpayer-funded police protection after stepping back from royal duties. Not only did he lose the case decisively, but he was ordered to pay substantial legal costs for the opposing side, millions of dollars that had to be handed over to the very government he was suing. "This is what we call burning capital to buy silence," Stevens explained. But silence was never actually achieved. The court transcripts became public record. The testimony became ammunition for critics. The money simply vanished into billable hours that produced nothing of value. There were libel cases against British newspapers that dragged on for years, consuming legal fees at both ends while generating headlines that consistently damaged Harry and Meghan's public image rather than rehabilitating it. Privacy lawsuits that created the Streisand effect, drawing more attention to the very information they were trying to suppress. The legal strategy, Palace analysts concluded, was fundamentally flawed. Harry approached litigation as emotional vindication rather than strategic business decisions. He wanted to win arguments and punish enemies, not calculate whether the cost of victory exceeded its value. "He's fighting battles that cannot be won in courtrooms," one legal observer noted, because what he's really seeking is validation, acceptance, and recognition that he was right all along. No judge can award that in a verdict. The truly devastating revelation: much of this legal warfare was financed through loans and credit lines extended based on the assumption that the royal family would ultimately cover any shortfalls. Lenders believed, incorrectly, as it turned out, that King Charles would never allow his son to default on obligations. That assumption is about to be tested. The paranoia premium, $31 million in security costs. Finally, Stevens unveiled what he termed the paranoia premium, security costs that have spiraled completely out of control since Harry lost access to Metropolitan Police protection upon leaving royal duties. The dossier revealed a staggering $31 million spent, owed, or projected for private security details over the past 5 years. $31 million for protection that, according to security experts, far exceeds what most celebrities, even A-list Hollywood stars, consider necessary or sustainable. When Harry departed the UK, he lost the protection of the Met Police, who guard working royals as part of their duties, protecting the institution of the monarchy itself. He replaced them with private contractors. Ex-Navy SEALs, former Secret Service agents, elite bodyguards who command premium rates and charge by the hour. The security apparatus Harry has constructed around himself and his family resembles what you'd expect for a head of state facing active threats, not a celebrity living in one of America's safest, most exclusive communities. Multiple armed guards rotating in shifts, armored vehicles, counter-surveillance technology, travel security for any movement outside Montecito. He is paying for presidential-level security on a podcaster's budget, Stevens argued, his assessment brutal but accurate. The security costs create a vicious cycle. Harry genuinely fears for his family's safety, fears that may be legitimate but are certainly amplified by leaving the institutional protection he once took for granted. Those fears drive security spending that drains his finances. Financial pressure forces him to pursue media deals that generate publicity. Publicity increases his perceived profile and thus his sense of needing more security. The business model is structurally insolvent, Stevens concluded. Prince Harry isn't just temporarily broke. He is operating an enterprise that loses money every time he wakes up. The streaming disaster, $26 million lost. Beyond the mortgage, legal fees, and security costs, the audit revealed another category of catastrophic loss: the streaming and media deals that were supposed to save everything. The Netflix contract, announced with such fanfare in 2020, promised over $100 million for multiple projects, including documentaries, docuseries, feature films, scripted shows, and children's programming. It was supposed to establish Harry and Meghan as content creators and storytellers on par with the Obamas, who had signed a similar deal. Instead, it became a masterclass in how not to manage a production company. The documentary series they did produce generated significant initial viewership driven by curiosity and controversy, but viewer retention dropped dramatically. Subsequent episodes saw massive audience decline. The content was criticized as tone-deaf, self-indulgent, and lacking the universal appeal Netflix expected for their investment. Promised follow-up projects stalled in development hell. Concepts were pitched and rejected. Scripts were commissioned and shelved. Nothing moved forward with the speed or quality Netflix demanded. The relationship soured beyond repair. Netflix quietly declined to renew the contract, and according to financial analysts, the Sussexes likely received only a fraction of the headline $100 million figure, possibly as little as $25 to $30 million over the life of the deal, with much of that consumed by production costs, overhead, and staff salaries. The Spotify deal collapsed even more spectacularly. After producing only 12 episodes of Meghan's Archetypes podcast, far fewer than the multi-year, multi-show commitment they'd agreed to, Spotify terminated the partnership. The public humiliation was complete when executive Bill Simmons called them fucking grifters on his own podcast. They took millions up front delivered minimal content and walked away before fulfilling their obligations, one media analyst explained. That kind of reputation makes it nearly impossible to secure future deals. The streaming disaster represents not just lost income, but lost opportunity. Those deals were supposed to be the foundation of post-royal financial independence. Their collapse left a crater in the Sussex business model that has never been filled. The Oak Room Summit, when family becomes finance. The setting for last night's confrontation carried enormous symbolic weight. This wasn't the comfortable domestic warmth of Clarence House, where King Charles typically conducts family business. It was the Oak Room at St. James's Palace, the historic beating heart of royal administration, where ambassadors are accredited, where state business is conducted, where the monarchy's most cold-blooded decisions have been made for centuries. Around the ancient mahogany table sat 4 people: King Charles III, Prince William, Princess Anne, and Sir Michael Stevens. The air was reportedly heavy with finality, similar to the atmosphere during the legendary Sandringham Summit in 2020, but with stakes that felt even more immediate. King Charles, looking visibly older and torn between duty and paternal instinct, spoke first. According to palace insiders familiar with the king's thinking, his instinct was deeply paternal. He looked at the $100 million figure and saw not just debt, but humiliation that could tarnish the crown forever. "We cannot have a son of the king appearing in American bankruptcy court," Charles reportedly said, his voice heavy with the weight of potential scandal. "It creates a spectacle we cannot control. It makes the monarchy look cruel and vindictive for letting him fall so far." Charles suggested a private settlement, a substantial loan from his personal wealth to clear Harry's most urgent debts. It would be structured as a loan with repayment terms, not a gift. It would be confidential, avoiding public spectacle. It would buy time for Harry to restructure his finances and hopefully generate sustainable income. "We help him once more," Charles pleaded, looking around the table. "We silence the creditors. We avoid the catastrophe of a royal bankruptcy that every newspaper on earth would cover for months." But before the proposal could even land with the others in the room, the mood shifted instantly and dramatically. William's devastating case against the bailout. Prince William did not look at his father. He looked at the numbers. He looked at the future. In a move that silenced the room completely, the Prince of Wales reached into his briefcase. He didn't pull out a checkbook or sympathy. He pulled out a document bound in black leather, the Commercial Liability Assessment. "This is not about saving Harry," William stated, his voice calm but cutting through the room like a scalpel. "This is about preventing us from funding our own destruction." Prince William's argument was brutal, methodical, and ultimately undeniable. He argued that bailing Harry out wasn't an act of family charity or royal duty. It was a catastrophic strategic error that would harm the monarchy far more than allowing Harry to face the consequences of his choices. "We need to face an uncomfortable reality," William said, his words measured but devastating. "Harry is no longer just a private citizen living his life in California. He is a media content producer whose primary product is us. His business model requires our family to be villains in his narrative." The room fell silent as William laid out what palace analysts had identified as the two Harrys problem, a fundamental contradiction that made any bailout futile. "The American media machine that pays Harry requires him to be a victim," William explained. "If we step in and save him now, the victim narrative collapses. He would be contractually and financially incentivized to manufacture a new grievance, to find a new way to paint us as villains just to keep the content pipeline flowing." William pulled out examples. He referenced the Oprah interview that came after the family had tried to accommodate Harry and Meghan's concerns. He pointed to the Netflix documentary that dropped new accusations even after attempts at private reconciliation. He highlighted the memoir Spare that violated confidences just when relationships seemed to be stabilizing. "Every time we extend compassion, it gets weaponized," William said. "Every private conversation becomes a chapter in the next book. Every financial lifeline becomes breathing room to plan the next media attack." Prince William then reminded everyone that as Duke of Cornwall, he now controls the duchy revenues. Substantial funds that historically provided financial support to family members, including Harry. "Not a single pound of duchy money will cross the Atlantic to subsidize a lifestyle built on attacking the institution that generated that wealth," William declared. "That's not cruelty. That's basic fiduciary responsibility." He painted a scenario that chilled everyone in the room. If they bailed Harry out now, they would simply be postponing the inevitable while making it more expensive. Harry's spending patterns wouldn't change. His business model wouldn't change. In 2 years, they'd be back in this exact room facing an even larger debt with even fewer options. "He hasn't just burned the bridges between us," William concluded. "He's erected toll booths on those bridges, charging admission to anyone who wants to watch them burn. Every time we try to rebuild, he lights another fire, because the flames generate more revenue than reconciliation ever could." The king looked to Princess Anne, perhaps hoping for a voice of moderation or compromise, but the Princess Royal was already nodding in agreement with William. Princess Anne delivers the killing blow. Princess Anne is not known for sentimentality when institutional survival is at stake. She is the hardest-working member of the royal family, completing more engagements annually than any other royal. She views the monarchy not as a family enterprise, but as a military-style operation that must function regardless of personal feelings. When Anne spoke, she didn't address the emotional dimension at all. She talked about contagion, the risk that Harry's financial collapse poses to the institution itself. "Trauma explains behavior, Charles," Anne said, her tone sharp and precise. "I understand that Harry carries wounds from losing his mother, from the pressures of royal life. I have compassion for it." She paused, letting that acknowledgement settle before delivering her verdict. But trauma does not excuse financial recklessness, and it absolutely does not authorize him to sell our family's privacy to the highest bidder to pay for that recklessness. Compassion cannot become complicity. Anne picked up the file labeled "Security Costs" and held it up like evidence in a trial. "He is spending $6 million per year on security that exceeds what most heads of state require. This isn't security, it's theater, and we're being asked to fund the production." Then she deployed a metaphor that ended the debate entirely. "The monarchy is a ship of state," Anne declared. "The captain cannot allow a sailor to drill holes in the hull just because he claims he's seasick. You don't comfort him by letting him sink the entire ship. You put him ashore before he drowns everyone." Anne then introduced the term that would define the rest of the meeting: toxic asset. In finance, a toxic asset is something that has lost significant value and cannot be sold because there's no market for it, Anne explained. Yet it continues to drain capital from whoever holds it. Harry fits this description perfectly. She walked through the logic methodically. As long as Harry remains attached to the royal balance sheet, as long as creditors believe the family will ultimately backstop his debts, the institution remains vulnerable to his financial decisions and his business model of monetized grievance. If we pay this debt, Anne reasoned, we're not solving the problem. We're validating his business model. We're teaching him that no matter how much damage he causes, the family will always pay the bill. That's not mercy. That's enabling self-destruction while putting the entire institution at risk. She looked directly at King Charles with something approaching sympathy but unmistakable firmness. You cannot save someone who is drowning if they're determined to pull you under with them. The toxic asset verdict landed with devastating finality. This wasn't about punishment or revenge. It was about quarantine, isolating a financial and reputational contagion before it infected the entire institution. The St. James Protocol, financial strangulation. With the emotional debate settled and the king's reluctant approval secured, discussion time was over. Now came execution. Sir Michael Stevens opened the final folder, a document that will never be published on the royal website, never shared with the BBC, never leaked to journalists. History will remember it as the St. James Protocol. This wasn't designed to be a public relations document. It was an operational manual for financial separation, drafted with the cold precision of a corporate restructuring plan. Prince William, as the architect of this new approach, outlined its 3 pillars. Each component was designed to address a specific vulnerability in what palace analysts had identified as the Sussex financial dependency model. Clause 1. The sovereign firewall. The first pillar is absolute separation, William stated, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. Effective immediately, an impenetrable firewall was erected around all royal financial resources. The protocol explicitly forbade any transfer of funds to Prince Harry or any entity he controls. This included direct transfers, third-party intermediaries, or indirect support through shared investments. The clause allowed for no exceptions. It meant that even in catastrophic scenarios, foreclosure, bankruptcy, or public humiliation, the palace would not intervene with financial rescue. If Harry wants to operate as a private businessman, he must accept the risk of private failure, William explained. We are not closing the Bank of Pa temporarily. We are deleting the account entirely. Clause 2. The global credit freeze. This was perhaps the most damaging blow to the Sussex brand. Sir Michael Stevens explained that for years, Harry had been operating in a gray zone, where international lenders assumed the king would ultimately back his son's obligations. That assumption had allowed Harry to secure mortgages and loans at favorable rates, despite having minimal personal income. His last name was worth millions in implied collateral, until now. The St. James Protocol authorized a new directive to be quietly communicated to major financial institutions, notice of non-liability. From this moment forward, the royal household would inform relevant banks and credit agencies that the Duke of Sussex is a financially independent entity. The Crown provides no collateral, no guarantees, and no safety net for his obligations. This notice wouldn't be published publicly. It would be delivered through discreet channels, private communications between the royal household's financial team and the credit departments of major institutions. This shatters the invisible collateral that has allowed Harry to live beyond his means, Stevens explained. His credit rating will plummet not because of missed payments, but because the foundation of his creditworthiness, his family connection, has been formally disclaimed. Clause 3. Legal firewall and communications blackout. The protocol formalized the end of the half-in, half-out model that had created so many problems. There would be no more negotiation, no more case-by-case decisions, no more personal appeals to family members who might be swayed by emotion. Any communication from Montecito regarding financial matters would be routed directly to external legal counsel retained specifically for this purpose, not to King Charles personally, not to Prince William's office, to lawyers whose only job was to enforce the protocol without emotional complications. The direct line to the king's checkbook is severed permanently, William stated. Prince William looked at the completed document with something approaching admiration for its cold efficiency. It was a bureaucratic masterpiece, a system designed to accomplish ruthless financial separation while providing plausible deniability for any accusation of cruelty. The protocol didn't strip Harry of his titles, which would have caused public outcry. It simply stripped away the financial infrastructure that had always existed invisibly beneath the surface of royal life. It turned the title Duke of Sussex into a hollow shell, a label without leverage, a brand without backing, a name that no longer opened doors or secured credit. "This is not punishment," William said. "This is risk management. This is treating Harry exactly as he has demanded to be treated, as an independent private citizen fully responsible for his own financial decisions." He signed his initials on the internal memo. King Charles followed, his signature slower and heavier, but no less definitive. Princess Anne witnessed both signatures. By the time the meeting adjourned shortly after midnight, the St. James Protocol was active. The fortress monarchy had closed its vault doors with silent finality, and 5,000 miles away in Montecito, Prince Harry had no idea that the ground beneath him had just vanished completely. The California Awakening. 5,000 miles from the rain-soaked pavement of St. James's Palace, the sun was rising over Montecito. It was Tuesday morning, typically a time for scheduling meetings and strategic planning calls at the Sussex residence. Prince Harry walked into his home office, unaware that tectonic plates had shifted overnight. He was reportedly calm, perhaps even cautiously optimistic. For 40 years, he had operated under a single comforting assumption. No matter how bad things got, the Bank of Paw would always be open. He believed that if he truly hit rock bottom, if creditors genuinely threatened foreclosure, the palace would quietly intervene. They had always protected embarrassing royals before. Why would he be different? He was waiting for a confirmation code from his bank, waiting for salvation that existed only in his imagination. The realization didn't arrive with dramatic fanfare. It arrived with a humiliating phone call that shattered every assumption Harry had carried since childhood. According to sources familiar with the timeline, Harry's financial team had scheduled a call with the Duchy of Cornwall's liaison office to discuss restructuring his liabilities. They expected the usual polite, deferential tone. When the call connected, the voice on the other end was different. It wasn't the friendly aide at Clarence House, whom Harry had known since childhood. It was a senior legal counsel from an external firm, exactly as the St. James Protocol mandated. "I'm afraid that is not possible, sir," the official said, the tone professional but completely devoid of warmth or negotiation. Harry's team pushed back, explaining the urgency. The mortgage payment was due. Creditors were becoming aggressive. Surely this was just a procedural delay. "Does the king know?" one of Harry's advisors asked, desperation creeping into his voice. "The directive comes from London," the voice replied with devastating finality. "The royal household is strictly prohibited from facilitating personal credit arrangements for the Duke of Sussex. The request is denied. Good day." The line went dead. Harry stared at the phone, the silence crushing. This was what palace insiders called the cold line. The moment when a royal realizes they have been formally cut off, not temporarily, but permanently. The rejection didn't end with the phone call. Within hours, a formal email arrived from the palace's external legal team. Not only was the $100 million bailout request denied, but the palace was calling in old debts. An itemized invoice regarding outstanding costs for the renovations of Frogmore Cottage. The message was crystal clear. You are not a beneficiary anymore. You are a debtor. And debtors pay what they owe. The desperate attempts to bypass the system. Panic set in as Harry realized this wasn't a temporary freeze or bureaucratic error. This was systematic, intentional, and final. He tried to bypass the official channels, reaching out to his back channel, a trusted aide at Clarence House who had often acted as a sympathetic buffer between Harry and his father during previous disputes. The call failed to connect. An automated message played, "This number is no longer in service." The number had been deliberately disconnected as part of the communications blackout specified in the St. James Protocol. Harry tried emailing the private server he'd used for years to send family updates and photos of the children. Access denied. Your credentials are no longer valid. The account had been deleted. Another bridge burned. Another connection severed. Harry walked out onto the terrace of his Montecito mansion. The physical distance between California and England suddenly feeling infinite. The existential distance was even greater. For 5 years, he had been fighting a war against his family, assuming that at the end of the day, they were still his family. He assumed that if the wolves were truly at the door, his father would pick up the phone. But the St. James Protocol proved that King Charles the Father had been overruled by King Charles the Monarch. The palace wasn't shouting at him. They weren't leaking stories to embarrass him. They were doing something far worse. They were ignoring him. They were treating him exactly like every other celebrity in Montecito. Rich, famous, but utterly powerless when the bill comes due. Without that access, without that royal fairy dust of financial immunity, his value to creditors would plummet. He was no longer a prince in exile. He was just a man with $100 million debt and a disconnected phone line. The price of freedom. As the sun sets over the silent phone lines in Montecito, a different reality settles over Prince Harry. The St. James Protocol was never just about $100 million. It was about defining the cost of freedom. The hard lesson emerging from this crisis is about the price of admission. In life, as in business, you cannot burn down the headquarters and then expect the company to cover your living expenses. Harry wanted the autonomy of a private citizen, but demanded the safety net of a royal prince. He forgot that true independence means paying your own bills. Even when the lights go out, you can choose your path, but you cannot choose how the people you left behind protect their assets from your exit. Some will call William cold for refusing this bailout. Others will call him a rational CEO saving a historic institution from a hostile takeover. He realized that despair had become a financial liability. By cutting the cord, William didn't destroy his brother. He forced him to finally face the consequences of independence. The era of the royal safety net is over. The era of accountability has returned. Now, the judgment is yours. Did the monarchy make the right move to treat Harry as a toxic asset and implement the St. James Protocol? Or should a father have paid the debt regardless of the consequences? If this deep dive into the secret financial war of the Windsors opened your eyes to what's really happening behind palace walls, hit that like button. It tells the algorithm you want the truth, not carefully managed PR statements. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because inside the palace, the vault is locked. And we're tracking every development as this financial crisis unfolds in real time. The Bank of Pa is closed. The real accounting has only just begun. And Prince Harry is about to learn that freedom without responsibility isn't freedom at all. It's just expensive isolation with a mortgage he can't afford.